I was thinking about a way that we've seen a violation of the laws of power. There's one of the laws of power, I forget which one. It's one toward the end of the book, the last third, if I remember right. And it talks about not losing perspective, not isolating yourself lest you lose perspective. I think it had something to do with putting oneself in a tower or something like that. The idea being that it was he exemplified it through the story of some designer or painter that had sequestered himself in the area that he was going to be doing the paintings in, of the walls and the dome, and he wasn't allowing anybody to, interrupt him or talk to him or this and that. Well, eventually his benefactor comes in because people are saying there's rumors that he was getting kind of strange. So the benefactor shows up and says, I want to see where your progress is at. And the perspective of all the various characters was all distorted by this time. Out of proportion, movement was all wrong. And it was because he had isolated himself, he had started going a little buggy. Now, at that time, probably this is the, 16th century or something like that. People, you might get a little buggy, just there's kind of all kinds of things that might happen like that, But the key thing, that was he was getting into was you isolate yourself or you stay in one position too long and you lose perspective. And the losses, the market losses that people are calculating, but because Hollywood has such a weird, and entertainment has such a weird way of accounting, it's its own kind of unique form of accounting, literally termed Hollywood accounting, that we're having kind of some tough time seeing okay, so how much are they making and losing on these various projects that just are not panning out, and no matter what people want to call them, categorize these various projects as whatever, it's just they're not panning out. So these projects don't pan out. They don't make the money back. You would think at some point, because these take so much time to plan out, there's so much effort, there's so many people involved. At some point, one would think there's like a team, a relatively large team, that it has to get sat down with and okay, so why are we making these kind of stories? Why are we doing this? Why are we making video games like this? So especially with like a million possible stories that already are known hits in some way or another, from all over the world, that are still recorded for centuries. Centuries of stories. You could just change the names and some of the settings. There's even kind of a way of thinking about it that one would wonder, how well read are a lot of these creatives? Really, how much of good creative material have they actually exposed themselves to? Because at a certain point, this becomes, the loss of perspective, then there's no rapport with the audience. And so what the person is presenting is just distorted. And really, now, this has become something that, the right picked up on this quite a number of years ago by looking at that which had been done better. That it's still, though, in some way kind of was getting across this or that socio-political idea, like the movie Brazil has a few different things in it that it's in, it was hitting me only a few moments ago. The various forms of 80s, the dancing one with Kevin Bacon, Footloose, these various things of you need to respect the youth, and there's a revolution of culture, and mama, this is, you don't understand me, and there's a lot of this was actually kind of wholesomely done, and that's why it worked. That was what was so good about it, to the point where people remember Footloose fondly without really thinking about this context of there were towns that banned dancing at one time in the United States. People don't know that. And people might think like, like that's kind of a preposterous idea, for a movie. But it's like, no, really, no. America once had parts of the country you could not dance publicly in, especially in mixed couples or anything like that, men and women. So there's this rapport that would exist in, but then there's people who are like, oh, yeah, he's just having a good time. He's from the big city, trying to show the people from the small town a good time. Outsiders, another one. Really good way of seeing socio-political class issues. The idea of how whites aren't all the same, that they did not see each other as the same, and people didn't really put together. If you look at the names of the various characters, the author was astute enough to use names that would be believable to the readers. So that's why the character Dallas, that makes a lot of sense. That like a name like that, like, even though if I remember correctly, he wasn't from Dallas, if I remember, but I forget. But I'd have to look that up again. So and nicknames like that, like Pony Boy and stuff like that, that they indicated the actual, not just class, but the culture of the characters in Outsiders, and people just don't understand that, so they don't understand the rapport that had with, especially with now, like, white people that scarcely exists. You'd have to go to mostly the Midwest, up to the Appalachian country in Florida, if I'd imagine, to still find kind of something that would be like that cultural divide. But so what these people did in violating this is, so they made this work. Then they're with the perspective all distorted. So then when it shows to people are like, wait, this is all messed up. This is all out of sync. It's all out of focus. It doesn't make sense. What is this supposed to be? And Twitter has made this weird phenomena happen that these people then come back and say, what the fuck do you mean? This is brilliant. So this is not just a not understanding, not having a perspective, not having rapport, but really not getting like, no, the audience is really confused by you. Like, the audience doesn't know what to make of this. And it's not in the good way. Like, that's what you want at a punk rock show. You don't really want that when it's supposed to be something, a family kind of thing. You want rapport. You want a familiarity of some point, in some way, shape, or form. And oh, well, so the idea being that what's replaced is then identity, quote unquote, this thing, identity. There's these marginalized children who can identify with the little fireball girl or the water drop boy or whatever it is. But yet the market doesn't say that. The market keeps saying, and what's interesting is then the stuff that does do very well. There was a recent one, and it was such a fascinating character that did so well, because whatever the lore or the character's basis was, I believe the idea is that they're American Hispanics, and one of these female characters was just a very kind of broad-chested, like, she was a kind of a big girl, but she was like really, really strong. She was inordinately and cartoonishly strong. And the thing was, there was nothing odd. It was just a thing about her. And, because she was the tank. And they did that. This is the tank. This is the person, and everyone understood. The kids understood. There was all immediately a rapport. They understood who this character was supposed to be. The jovial tank. With the jovial thing being like Jove, and that's where you get like the Jovian sort of body type of like the big bear-like guy who's really nice, even though he's really big. rather than the eternal figure who's like the dark and handsome, like the dark-haired, tall, kind of frightening and handsome. And is the idea is that these are two different like kind of types, eternal and jovial. And so the thing that I've just been thinking about that violation, more and more stuff like the laws of power. And then you find things like scriptural admonition, that a law of power like that, when violated, the tremendous amount of loss in the market is the part that I'm wondering. Who's sitting there going, this is fine losing this amount of money? Because, I mean, this isn't like they can't just have endless amounts of freaking money. You're seeing cuts, and so the idea of like the writer's strike is this cover for them, eventually firing a lot of these people. But I just sit back going, where's all this money? And who's sitting there going, this is a great idea. This is a fantastic idea. This is going to sell. This is a hit. That's the part that I think, and then also the market testing, where at some point there's a testing of, would you go and see a movie like this? Look at these characters. What do you think of them? Yada, yada, yada. And that I just sit back and I'm like, how isn't it hitting you how much of that this doesn't work, that nobody wants this? Like at some point there's got to be those surveys or those kind of questionnaires and such that it's like, no, nobody really wants that. And and so I've just been really mulling this over, like for a very long time. I never made a video about it, but it really hit me. It was that violation of the law of power. And so I think it's at these, we've already seen these people have formed cliques. These cliques then have taken over a lot of these studios and companies, and they keep making things like, Saints, the most latest Saints Row failure. Like that's a platinum mine. It was a platinum mine. And they destroyed the platinum mine. And over and over and over again, platinum mine after platinum mine is provided to this subculture of sort of ruinous creatives, and that the ruinous mistakes they make are quite obvious that they're going to be ruinous. And it's kind of bizarre, where you're just sitting there like, so who is sitting there saying, yeah, this is what we sink $100 million into? And that somebody's like, that's a hit. We're gonna make all the money, Solomon. I think we can make this into toys, Solomon. People will be buying this story for 20 years. Kids will grow up talking about this. For not say a weird example would be Friends. I see people with Friends gear every once in a while on, young people, like sweatsuits that are Friends sweatsuits. And I'm like, where'd you find that? Like, who makes a Friends sweatsuit? But it was that popular. It was that beloved. It had a rapport with people. I hated it. Always will hate the show Friends, but it was very popular with a lot of people. So it's one of these things where I just have to sit back and just be like, well, how is it that you all are missing on things like this? A bunch of people talking about their problems and going through sort of comical, normal problems around a coffee shop. Like, you can't do that. Nobody can Seinfeld, like they're just eating a sandwich someplace regularly, and this happens, this zany set of circumstances occurs. All right, I'm gonna go later.